Hey guys, it's me, April from Unsolicited Plant Talks, and welcome back to our channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about Hoya latifolia right here. I want to start a series on a channel called UPT Show and Tell, where I just get to pick a random plant that I wanted to show off and tell you guys information about how to care for them and whatever information that I may be able to share with you guys. Sometimes I do forget that not everybody gets to see how beautiful mature plants could be or how your cutting could look like when it's mature. And I think this is a really good series that I can get started on because that's all I do. I talk about plants. So today I want to talk about this particular species or variety because this week I noticed that it was so full of peduncles, as you can see right here, and it had just recently started blooming, and I thought it's a really good one to show off. This is a Hoya latifolia, formerly known as Polystachya. And just a side note, I know that it can get really confusing. A lot of old names have been changed to Hoya latifolia. And it's just to clarify, it's not necessarily that they're being republished into a different name. It's just because since 2019, we had a boom in the collection of Hoyas, and a lot of people are digging into the publications because it's just really fun to know where these plants came from, who discovered them, where they native at. And I think it's all really cool. However, because we have more people that are looking into it, now we are now realizing that a lot of Hoyas in circulation, or not necessarily a lot, but many of them have the wrong ID. So by following the guidelines or following the publications, some of the Hoyas known to be other species are now being correctly named to latifolia. And some examples of these are Hoya macrophylla. You guys are probably familiar with that. Snow queen. Species Sarawak, that's actually a kind of latifolia or a type of latifolia. Hoya polystachya, as you can see right here, and many more. Those are just some of the ones that we're finally realizing that, hey, you know what? This has been in circulation with the wrong name. And I think it's about time that we make sure that we tag them correctly so that whenever somebody new in the hobby gets in it and tries to figure out where these plants came from so that they can give it their best care that they can give it. So today I do want to put a spotlight on Hoya latifolia, formerly known as Polystachya, also was being circulated as Chadasmalangensis a while back. This particular one has been growing so well for me. This is probably 3 to 4 years old now. I obtained it as Hoya Chadasmalangensis, this particular clone. And I had obtained a Hoya polystachya as well back in the day. And they happened to show me the same growth habit in the same environment and same flowers. The main character of Hoya latifolias is this cluster of peduncles. You can see right here, it's so crazy. It's blooming like no other. And as you can tell right here, just from one node, it has developed multiple peduncles, and it hasn't just been blooming recently. As you can tell right here, it's very long, and you can tell that the plant is mature and it has been blooming for me for a long time. So that's a very specific character of latifolia. If you're familiar with some other latifolias, like formerly known as macrophylla, they also have the same growth habit of the peduncles, where they don't just produce one or two, but they produce a cluster, and it's actually really cool. Also, check out these beautiful yellow-green flowers. I don't know very many Hoyas that have this coloration on the flowers. Normally, they're pink or white or yellow. This one is almost like yellow-green. I don't know if it's just a contrast against the leaves when it's sunstressed like this, but I really like the colors of the flower. It's almost like it just stands out. When I go to the greenhouses and the polystochias that we have are flowering, it just pops. Whether your leaves are sunstressed or they're pure green, they just pop against it just because it's so beautiful. The only two other ways that I could think of at the moment that have this kind of color on the flowers are Hoya Penny Street, which is actually another cool Hoya, and Hoya Geneve. That's also an easy growing one. Other than that, those two also do have these beautiful coloration on their flowers. However, I think out of the three, this has the cutest flowers so far. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So some of you might think that the other ones are prettier than these. This is definitely the smallest out of the three. However, I think it's the daintiest looking and the cutest looking. I was actually going to clean this plant before I shot this video because I wanted it to be picture perfect and I want it to be pristine. However, I thought this is actually a really good learning lesson. If you look closely right here on the peduncles themselves, right here where old flowers have bloomed and had died off, you can tell that there are these black powdery substance that are just attached to them. You won't find them on the stems over here or anywhere else. They are localized to the peduncles themselves. What is soot? If you look up soot on Google, the most common response you're going to get is that they are a byproduct of pest on your plant that's feeding on your plant, and they excrete this waste that is, I guess, very susceptible to growing a specific type of mold, which is this soot right here. And although that is true, it's not always the case. When you see soot, that doesn't always mean that you have pests on your plants. For this particular variety right here, for this particular clone and particular plant that I'm holding right now, these particular ones that you're seeing are not byproduct of pest waste. These are actually from the nectar itself. So it is a combination of the nectar and the specific fungus that feeds onto those sweet nectar that these flowers excrete. When they feed on it, obviously it's hot, it's humid, it's like the perfect environment for them. And then over time, it just dries up. As you can see right here, if I really wanted to clean that, I can just wipe it off. And as you can see in the video, it just comes off really easily. So this won't really hinder the growth of this plant. If you do a little bit more digging into what soot is, you might also run into articles that claims that it can hinder the growth of the plant. Yes, it can, but that's for certain plants that are covered by soot. You will see lots of images on Google where the soot just kinds of cover the whole leaf. And obviously, because it's being covered by that powdery substance, it's not going to be able to photosynthesize as well as if it were just like this. Because the main photosynthesizer of this plant are the leaves, and the soot are only staying on the peduncles themselves, it's not that big a deal. It might not be the best looking plant if you really look into them and if that bothers you that much. But as far as health wise and growth wise, it's not going to affect your plant. I'll eventually clean these up, but as for right now, I mean, it's not really hurting the plant. And we'll see if I have extra time for it. For some Hoyas, you might also find some soot that are growing on the stem. For this particular one, it's not growing any on the stem because it doesn't have extrafloral nectaries. What is an extrafloral nectar? It's nectar that's being produced by the plant that is outside the flower themselves. So there are certain Hoyas that actually excrete nectar from their stem. And because the stems are sticky and that is the best food source for these fungus, the fungus attached to that, and then eventually you'll see some soot on your stem. And yeah, it might not be the best looking stem, but it doesn't really hurt the plant in my experience. So it's up to you however you wanted to handle that if you ever encounter that with your plant. But depending on where the soot is, or depending on why you have soot in your plant, you probably don't even have to worry about it as much. This particular Hoya is easy growing, easy, and very forgiving, in my opinion. It is in a 6-inch pot right here. It's very small compared to the Hoya itself. This Hoya has been growing here in this specific pot for 3 to 4 years now. And I haven't really done anything special to it. The main medium that I have in here is just pure husk. So I haven't really done anything special to it. I just had to make sure that it doesn't dry out for too long. But even then, this Hoya is so forgiving with drought. So this specific one is being grown in a bright and hot environment. And when you grow a Hoya in a bright and hot environment, they tend to have smaller and thicker leaves. And that is because they do try to retain as much water as they can for whenever they're not being watered as often, just because it's so hot. So the Hoya is trying to keep itself alive. And that is why you can see these leaves are very thick. Like I could hardly bend them. And so because of that, I don't really have to worry about forgetting to water this. I have some weeks, not even weeks, I have some days that I forget to water this specific one, or if I water it, I didn't water it enough. and it's very forgiving. It hasn't thrown a tantrum for me, and I just love it for that. Another thing, when you grow them in bright light, is that you will get this beautiful color on your leaves. And it is just a chemical reaction that kind of tells you it's trying to fight off the heat and the direct sun. Otherwise, it's normal, kind of like Japanese maple at the end of the year when it's starting to get cold. They change the colors of their leaves like the same way. It's just telling you that, hey, it's a little too bright over here. Is it really bad for the plant? Not really. Like I said, this is being fertilized, being watered regularly, and has just been growing consistently for me. You can grow it like that if you want a little pop of color. However, if you're a collector who doesn't like sunstressing your plants, then this is what it's going to look like. Here is the non-stressed version of this plant. As you can see right here, it's very green, very deep, same shape of the leaves, although the leaves are a bit bigger and they are still thick. They're not much thinner than the other ones. So right there, as you can tell, this is in a 4-inch spot, and this plant is very mature, ready to bloom, and ready to be in someone's home. So if you're interested, this is on the website. But yeah, I wanted to show off, hey, here's the difference between the two. So whatever your preference is, you can grow it in bright environment or you can grow it in low environment right there. You will be able to notice actually right here, if I put it side by side, the leaves of the one that is growing in the bright greenhouse is much smaller, or smaller, not necessarily much smaller than the leaves of the one growing in lower light. And that is because whenever you grow Hoyas or plants for that matter in low light, the leaves are going to be bigger because they're trying to produce more chlorophyll so they can capture as much light as they can to convert into energy to keep feeding the plant and making sure that it continues to grow happily. Those are the differences between the two. It's all preferential. If you prefer dark green, bigger leaves, then you go ahead and grow it in a lower light. If you like this look, then go ahead and grow it in a brighter light. Another difference is that when you grow it in a brighter environment, you will tend to see it bloom more often, produce more peduncles, just because that is one of the things that they look for to be able to bloom. Does that mean that your green one's not going to bloom? Not necessarily. It's just this plant will tend to bloom a lot more often. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, what if you want a large leafer like this one, but you want that color? All you have to do, and this is what I always tell our customers, it will take a little bit of patience, but you will have to grow your plant. Look at this. It's so big. You will have to grow your plant in lower light, get these really big leaves right here. And then when you're satisfied and when you're ready to expose it to bright light, then you just expose it slowly to bright light. But make sure you acclimate it first. So don't just take it out of low light environment and just blast it with light, because the plant's not going to be used to it. So it might burn. So you have to make sure that you slowly increase your light. Or if you're trying to grow it outside, make sure that you leave it out only in the morning for the first few weeks, and then you can leave it out all day if you feel like that's what you wanted to do. Here's a really good example of what I was talking about. So this plant originally was growing in low light. So I was getting a lot of big leaves, just like this one. And after I grew it for a little bit in low light, then I exposed it to bright light and I just let it live there because I really like the look and I really love these flowers. Let's talk about propagation. I have gotten questions in the past. How do I propagate Hoyas with woody stems? And this is actually a really good example of a woody stemmed Hoya. Sometimes when Hoyas are just that mature, they tend to keep growing and growing, and the stems keep getting thicker and thicker. And as you can tell right here, this is a very mature plant. It has been growing for a little bit, and the stems are very woody. I personally don't have a problem rooting them whether they're woody or not. So I treat them normally how I would propagate any other Hoyas, whether they're mature or not. However, I understand that this will take a little bit longer to root because they have to go through that layer of the stem to produce roots. Is that really a bad thing? Not necessarily. It just takes a little longer. And to be fair, this Hoya itself, because of how large the leaves are, when you take a cutting, personally, I do one node, maybe a pair of leaves, maybe one leaf, and a stem, and I just propagate it just like any other Hoyas. For this one, I just have to make sure that everybody's on the same page that this will take a little longer than any other Hoyas to root. So I tell everybody, if you see it declining compared to the other Hoyas that you had propagated at the same time, don't worry about it because of how big this plant is, how big the leaves are. The energy of the plant that is supposed to go to rooting only gets divided into keeping the leaves alive, which is so big, and also producing roots. So that's why it takes a little longer. Now, how do you combat that? Number one, there's so many options. Number one, just leave it as is. Just have more patience. And if you really wanted to try to expedite it, you're not going to like my answer. I'm just going to give you options so that if you wanted to try one of these options, then you can, as long as you have all of the information, right? If you have two leaves, so these are all the things that I have done. So I'm speaking out of experience. If I have a cutting that I feel like it's taking forever, and I've had those cuttings where for some reason, even on they're the same species, the same genus, on the same batch, the same day, it was propagated the same, and one just doesn't seem to get the assignment. If I have two leaves, I would chop off the other leaf. Why? Because my cutting wouldn't have to worry about keeping that leaf alive anymore and would be able to focus a lot of its energy into growing roots instead. Now, what if I only have one leaf left and it's still not rooting for me and I feel like it's just sucking so much energy out of the cutting? Then what I would typically do is I would cut the leaf in half because I don't want it to suck so much energy from the cutting itself, but still need that amount of leaf so that it can photosynthesize, so it can still convert some energy. It might not be as fast, but it would still be able to capture some light, photosynthesize, and provide energy to the cutting itself until it's ready or until it's well rooted and ready to start growing. Another unconventional way of how I personally expedite the rooting process of certain cuttings that I just feel are taking forever or I don't want to wait that long for them to root is I score the stem. And what scoring is you're creating little wounds on the stem, creating an opening, and then dipping the whole stem into a rooting powder so that there's a lot more opening and more chances for fresh roots to come out of instead of having to break through the thick layer of the stem itself. Now, it has worked for me wonderfully in the past, but I don't do it all the time. I will try my best to only do that if it's my last resort. Why? Because just like these stems and just like us, when you scratch yourself and you create an opening or a wound, you are susceptible to bacterias and you're susceptible to infections. It's the same thing for plants. If you create those cuttings, you just know that you're doubling, tripling up the risk and the possibility of your cutting getting infected. You're increasing the risk of rot on your plant. And instead of it helping, it might end up causing you to lose that cutting itself. So I don't recommend it all the time. When I do it on, like I said, that it's my last resort, I really wouldn't mind if I lose that plant at all because I have another plant that I can just cut. Just keep that in your diary or keep it on your options, but not necessarily something that you have to do to be able to root this plant. Those are just some of the tips that I can share with this one. I hope those are helpful. If you have any other tips that you can share with me and everybody else in the community, make sure to comment down below. But other than that, very easy plant. Nothing to be worried about when it comes to growing this plant because it's really just going to grow for you. There's really not much care to put into it. And that's a wrap. That is it for Hoya latifolia, formerly known as Polystachya / Chadas malangensis show and tell. If you learned something new, let me know down in the comment below. And if there's something that you wanted to share with me to increase my knowledge and into better growing these plants, please also let me know because I'm always open to that. And I hope you enjoyed this video. So if you are interested in more, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with your friends because Hoyas.